Tastiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Today we'll be discussing the local elections coming up in lots of parts of the country and in our nations on Thursday. Also the Blair era. Today marks 25 years since he became Prime Minister, and we also have a Real Me interview with the Labour MP, Fabian Hamilton. First is the latest GB News headlines. Good afternoon, it's 3 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the government is not making a real difference on migrant crossings. At least 300 people have been intercepted on up to 9 small boats in the English Channel so far today. Yesterday, the Ministry of Defence confirmed that 254 people arrived in 7 small boats. Well, that follows 11 days without crossings, with strong winds and choppy seas believed to have been a factor. Sir Keir says an international coordinated criminal response is what's needed.
I've worked on international criminal organisations before when I was Director of Public Prosecutions. I know what can be done if you've got teams working together across Europe, all the way along those routes, absolutely bearing down on these criminal gangs and working very closely with the French authorities as well.
In Ukraine, Mariupol officials say Russia resumed shelling the besieged steelwork plant as soon as buses carrying civilians had left. President Zelensky says around 100 civilians were evacuated from the site yesterday. Footage shows them emerging from the plant's rubble and being led to waiting coaches. One Mariupol resident, Natalia, says she had to hide in a nearby basement during the shelling.
We lived in the basement starting from the 27th of February. We didn't leave because our house is in close proximity with Azovstal. The whole time we were shelled with mines, and then airstrikes started. Our house is completely destroyed. We have a 2-story building. It's not there anymore. It burned to the ground.
Ukraine's Navy has released footage of what it claims shows a drone strike hitting 2 Russian high-speed patrol boats. The Raptor-class vessels are said to have been destroyed at dawn near Snake Island in the Black Sea. Moscow has not yet responded to the claim, and GB News cannot independently verify the video. Conservative MP Crispin Blunt has announced he'll stand down at the next election. Last month, the former Justice Minister apologised for causing significant upset and concern after he tweeted to show support for an MP who was found guilty of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy. Blunt originally claimed the MP, Imran Ahmed Khan, was the victim of a dreadful miscarriage of justice before then issuing an apology. A senior Conservative is rejecting calls to introduce an all-woman shortlist to replace the former MP Neil Parish. Parish sparked a by-election in his Tiverton and Honiton constituency after he resigned, having admitted to watching pornography in the Commons. Some Conservatives had suggested that a female candidate should replace him. The Minister for Higher and Further Education, Michelle Donnellan, told GB News imposing arbitrary quotas does not do women any favours.
I find quotas demeaning to women. Women can certainly get there on their own merit. We've seen that with 2 female prime ministers in my own party. We have a Home Secretary who's female, a Foreign Secretary who's female. What we need to be doing is encouraging women to come forward to stand, removing the barriers.
Thousands of voters won't have a choice for who to vote for in Thursday's local elections, as some seats only have one candidate standing. In the 91 council seats affected, the individual candidates will be elected automatically. The vast majority of them are in Wales, where 72 people will run unopposed. 2.7 million people have been referred for cancer checks over the last year. NHS data shows the number of patients receiving cancer treatment has risen by 2,000 since the start of the pandemic. The NHS says it's expanded its services' diagnostic capabilities with one-stop shops for tests and mobile clinics. The director of the Barts Cancer Centre, Tom Powles, told us the NHS needs more staff.
Cancer remains our number one killer will be in the future, and now we have this huge healthcare problem. Do we have the resource to deal with it, which is your question? The human resource we probably don't have right now.
The Prime Minister is considering giving housing association tenants the right to buy. The Telegraph's reporting that Boris Johnson has asked officials to draw up plans to help young people struggling to get on the property ladder in England. Freddie Poser of the campaign group Priced Out says the government needs to build more homes.
This wouldn't help solve the housing crisis. The housing crisis is fundamentally one of supply. We need to find a world where we're building enough houses. Playing around with things like right to buy for housing associations will simply mean that there's less social and affordable rent properties available in 5 years, assuming we don't build them.
You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to this afternoon's briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on the briefing, well, it's the local elections this Thursday, and today we'll be turning our attention to Colchester, where I'll be speaking to representatives of political parties about issues in that area. Today marks 25 years since Tony Blair was given the keys to number 10. We reflect on the new Labour era and the current state of the Labour Party with a former advisor. And we have a wide-ranging Real Me interview with Labour MP Fabian Hamilton, where he tells us about his election to Parliament during Tony Blair's landslide victory in 1997. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Welcome to the programme. It's fast approaching the local elections, and opinion polls suggest there could be a big swing to Labour in cities while the Tories may hold seats in towns. Today we are looking at Colchester, the Colchester Borough Council, which promises to be a very close race. The current political shape of the Colchester Borough Council is: the Conservatives currently have the most seats. However, no party has overall control, no one party. 62 candidates are vying for election. 18 seats are up for election on Thursday. 26 council seats are needed for a majority. Some of the local issues in this election are housing, flooding and roads. And the national issues, we're all familiar with those: Partygate, cost of living, levelling up. Well, today we're holding a special debate ahead of the election on Thursday, and joining me now from Colchester is the local Conservative leader, Paul Dundas, Labour leader, Adam Fox, and Liberal Democrat leader, Martin Goss. We did also invite a representative from Colchester's Green Party onto the show today, but we didn't hear back from them, not as yet anyway. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for your time today.
Pleasure.
I'm going to start by asking all of you in turn. You're out campaigning to elect local representatives to represent your local community, but we all know that national politics is always a massive issue in local election, that is the reality. Paul, if I can start with you, how do you deal with that? How do you get people to separate the national from the local?
I think people can separate it. I think you need to talk to them. You need to explain why you're there. And I think you need to explain what a councillor actually does. When you actually really start talking to people, you'll actually find that the issues they're concerned about are incredibly local. We think it might just be about what type of council they elect, but you'll actually find that the real issue they want you to solve is a dropped curb outside their house, or a piece of grass which doesn't get cut, or something like that. So once you get into that conversation, actually, I think people don't underestimate voters. They're quite capable of distinguishing between the two.
Martin, of the Liberal Democrats, same question to you. Are you just talking local, or are you focusing on national issues too?
So certainly we're talking about local issues. So that would be dogs' mess, potholes, graffiti, housing issues, but national issues are coming up, and clearly the Conservative Party in Colchester is embarrassed to be associated with the Conservative Party nationally, because they've actually removed any reference to being Conservatives on their election literature. So that obviously does show that the national issues do resonate locally, and it is coming up on the doors. There's no question that that will influence the outcome in Colchester, because there are a lot of angry Conservative voters that will not vote Conservative because of the constant issues from Parliament. And yet we've got, Porngate that's just come up, or Corngate. And so this will affect the Tories. The Tories in Colchester, I think, are going to get absolutely hammered, and they know it. They've removed any reference to being Conservatives on their own literature, including, I think, Mr Dundas. You have to ask them why.
OK, Adam, same question to you. Local or national? It's a local election, but national issues are going to play, aren't they?
Of course they are, Gloria. So, we're talking to people about local issues, but the national picture has a real impact on these elections. So the cost of living crisis just keeps coming up again and again and again, and people just don't feel that the Conservative government are doing enough to help them with fuel bills and with energy bills and with the cost of food in the supermarket. And Partygate as well just hangs over this elections like a really bad smell. And as Martin just alluded to, Conservative voters are really, really angry. And increasingly what we're hearing is they want to send a message to the government, and they're voting Labour as a result of that.
OK. Of those three issues, I will start with Martin this time. If I were to say cost of living, Partygate, are either of those issues, is Partygate really coming up on the doorstep?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Certainly, as Adam said, the cost of living does come up because, petrol's at an all-time high, 162.9 at my local garage down the road. My fuel bill's gone from £85 a month to 228, and I'm still on a capped tariff with E.ON. And yes, indeed, the government comes up time and time again, certainly with the what we call softer Tory voters, those ones that will switch. Hardcore Tory voters, I think, will be staying at home because they just can't face voting Tory. And I'm certainly finding this across Colchester, and they are voting Liberal Democrat in those seats where the Liberal Democrats will wipe out the Tories, including Mr Dundas's Stanway, where I've been canvassing even yesterday afternoon. So, there is a lot of anger. And again, comes back to why the Tories not putting Conservative on their own election literature. You have to ask that question.
Adam, to you next. The same question, which is a bigger issue? I put it to you that I reckon the cost of living issue is probably coming up more than Partygate. Of course, correct me if I'm wrong. But if that is the case, has the party talked a little too much about parties and when it should have been focusing all its energy on the cost of living?
I think that the parties responded to the media on this in terms of Partygate, and clearly, that's been the big story in Westminster. But when we've been out talking to people, and that's not just in the last few weeks, but the last few months, the cost of living is absolutely the worry for people. And it's not just the poorest people in Colchester, it's people who used to think they were on a decent income. And their energy bills have absolutely gone through the roof. The cost of petrol, filling up their car or their van for work, now is taking up much more of their weekly or monthly spend. And they're looking to the local council to see what they can do to help to support them. And of course, what they've been faced with this year is a Conservative-run council that put up council tax. Labour, Lib Dem, Green councillors locally all voted for a freezing council tax because we thought that, if people are tightening their own belts, then the council had to tighten its belt too. And they've just been whacked with, local taxes from the Conservatives and taxes from the Conservative government as well.
Paul, it's tough when your party is in government, whichever party that is, but when you are standing for election or when you are campaigning for elections locally and your party's government is being accused of not doing enough in the cost of living, that's a tough chat for you to have on the doorstep.
It is. First, I can reassure Martin, this is actually my own election address. I'm sure you can see the Conservative logo, pleasantly bold there. So I'm not quite sure what he's talking about there. But what we're finding on the doorstep is that there is a general frustration from people that politicians are obsessed about talking about themselves. What we hear is they say, well, we're hearing from MPs, all they talk about is basically their workplace, and they're not talking enough about the issues. I would agree cost of living comes up, but what we're hearing is people are saying, well, look, we accept that the price of oil dictates the price of at the petrol pumps. Now, they may well say, well, actually, what are the Conservatives going to do about it? But they're also saying, well, I haven't actually heard a good plan from Labour or the Lib Dems or anybody else as to what they're going to do about it. What are they actually going to do about a supply-side inflation crunch from China in the UK? So I think that there is a frustration from the electorate. We probably will be affected by it. It'd be silly of me to say that we won't. But it certainly has. I've experienced it to be much better on the doorstep than, to be honest, I was expecting.
OK, interesting. Right, just one line, if that's possible for you to ever ask that of politicians, but I'm going to have a go. What is each of your respective parties' key pledge that you are offering to the Colchester community? You're calling them to vote Conservative, Labour or Liberal Democrat, primarily because you will deliver X. I want to know what X is, and we will start with you, Martin.
So Lib Dem-led council will absolutely help local residents with help to ensure that the cost of living locally comes down as much as possible, whilst not cutting frontline services and making Colchester cleaner and greener, because in the last 12 months, it certainly has gone back. Recycling rates have gone down. The A12 looks dreadful. The town centre looks more grotty.
Okay.
We will turn that around.
That was a long sentence, but I'll give you it. Adam.
So Labour councils across the country deliver a lower council tax, £330 on average in every council that's Labour-led compared to Conservative councils. And we would deliver cleaner, safer streets for people. People are fed up with litter, graffiti, fly tipping and antisocial behaviour. And we deliver a team in each neighbourhood to make sure that the area outside the front of people's houses is safe and well looked after.
Paul.
Thank you. Well, firstly, you'll get a Conservative council or a Conservative-led council. Everybody else says they're a progressive alliance. We're not quite sure what that means. They just seem to say that, but have a lot of goes at each other on Twitter. You will get a very clear investment package for the town centre. You will get a very clear master plan, the first we've had for about 40 years for the town centre, and you will get an efficient, professionally run council.
OK, this is the last question. We've got only a couple of minutes left, so when I ask for one key sentence, please bear with me. Paul, I will start with you. There'll be people watching who think, actually, maybe I would quite like to be a local councillor. How do they do it? What's the best thing about being a local councillor? Paul?
The best thing is meeting people and dealing with residents, and just approach a local party. They are desperate for candidates, so please do. But if we want to get people involved, we actually need to be a lot nicer to one another and treat each other with a lot more respect in Colchester, because if we don't, we won't attract people to stand.
Adam.
Yeah, I'd say being a councillor is great fun. We've got a fantastic team in Colchester, and people can contribute to their local community. And every Labour councillor that gets elected in Colchester is a step forward to us getting a Labour MP in Colchester at the next general election.
And finally to you, Martin.
Yeah, being a councillor is absolutely a privilege. I absolutely love all the hours outside my full-time job doing it. And if you want to know more about being a local councillor for the Lib Dems, just get in touch with me and I'll certainly give you the honest view. But it is great. It is good meeting people, getting things done. Even if you get a litter bin put in your community, it's a good step forward. It's local issues for local people on local matters.
I've really enjoyed our discussion. Good luck to you all the parties standing for election on Thursday. Adam from Labour, Martin from the Lib Dems and Paul from the Conservatives, thank you. On Thursday, as we were saying, people will be going to the polls in local council elections. It's not in every area in England, but it is in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. With the cost of living crisis and Boris Johnson finding himself continuously embroiled in the Partygate controversy, could it hit the Tories at the ballot box? Our London reporter Alice Porter looks at 3 key areas in the capital at this election.
Traditionally, London has been red in a sea of blue in the south-east of England, with 21 of London's 33 boroughs currently under Labour's control. But the Lib Dems are defending their stronghold in southwest London, where they have 3 MPs. They're hoping to increase their 3 Lib Dem-run councils on Thursday. In 2018, Barnet and Wandsworth voted Conservative. Croydon continued to vote Labour. But could that all change in this election?
On May the 5th, people in Croydon will vote in a new mayor for the first time, following a referendum last year. And a key issue dominating the local council elections is Labour's handling of the borough's finances after the council had to declare bankruptcy in 2020.
They've been given the money, where's the money gone? You know, it's not them suffering, it's everyone else suffering, and the area's turning into, quite frankly, a dump. You know, and they need to be held accountable.
They need to be brought to question. They need to tell everyone openly how they spent that money, who took the money, where did it go, and we need to get it back.
I think we really need to press on, try and shake off that anger and see what we can do to make things better.
On the other side of London, Keir Starmer has been out campaigning in Barnet, which has the highest Jewish population in the UK. Labour lost the seat in 2018 under Jeremy Corbyn amidst criticism of the party's handling of anti-Semitism. Daniel Koski is director of the London Jewish Forum.
I think we'll see people who previously were historic Labour voters but felt like they couldn't vote for the Labour Party at the last election, feeling like they probably can vote for the Labour Party this time around. But I think what's going to be particularly interesting is, are the Labour Party going to be able to win back those Jewish swing voters who at the last election were absolutely not going to vote for the Labour Party, but this time around, can they convince them to vote for the Labour Party if they are, say, unhappy with the government?
The Conservatives have held Wandsworth for over 40 years, keeping popular with the lowest average council tax in the country. But political scientist Sir John Curtis says polls suggest they may lose it to Labour.
We can anticipate something like 2-3% swing against the Conservatives across London. Nothing very large, but if that were to happen, the odds are that would probably be sufficient, given there are a number of marginal wards for the Conservatives to be unseated. So they're going to have to do bucking the trend once again if they're going to hang on to this borough.
After a difficult few weeks for Boris Johnson, Thursday will be the first electoral test to see whether it will impact the Conservatives in the ballot box. Alice Porter, GB News.
Coming up next, we have a special report from GB News security editor Matt White on the anniversary of the Falklands War. Before that, a short break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Welcome back. One of the commanders of a British submarine which sank a key Argentinian warship during the Falklands War says he stands by the decision to attack the vessel. Today marks the 40th anniversary of the sinking of the General Belgrano by the British nuclear-powered submarine HMS Conqueror, with a loss of 323 lives. It proved to be the most controversial moment in the conflict, with Argentina claiming that it was an illegal act because the Belgrano was allegedly sailing away from the conflict zone and returning to port, as our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has been finding out.
There was a cheer as we heard the explosion, and the captain reported from the periscope seeing it, because we had done what our government tasked us to do, and we were very professional about it. Followed almost instantaneously with absolute silence, and as everyone had their own thoughts, thinking there were over 1,000 sailors on board the Belgrano and they were doing what their government tasked them to do.
It's 40 years since Vice Admiral Sir Tim McClement was a young lieutenant commander in the Royal Navy, second in command of the submarine HMS Conqueror, as it shadowed and then fired on the Argentinian cruiser General Belgrano. It was one of the most controversial episodes in the Falklands War, with claims the Belgrano was sailing away from a 200-mile UK-imposed exclusion zone around the islands. But Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher agreed with her senior military commanders that the Belgrano posed a direct threat to the Royal Navy task force heading for the South Atlantic.
Admiral Woodward had 2 carriers and not very many Harriers, and the Argentinians had over 200 aircraft, so we had to protect our carriers, because if we lost one, then that would be the end of our ability to retake the islands. And at the time, on the beginning of May, Admiral Woodward believed there was a pincer movement with the Argentinian aircraft carrier to the northwest of the islands, coming with his escorting destroyers, and to the southwest of the islands, the Belgrano group with two destroyers as well.
The Belgrano, which began life as the American light cruiser USS Phoenix, had survived Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, only to succumb to 2 Royal Navy torpedoes. 323 Argentinians died on board the Belgrano. This notorious Sun headline at the time was later toned down as the extent of the loss of life became apparent.
It was the big turning point. They knew from that moment, I can remember being told, I was with the troops in the Canberra at the time, that this had happened. And within 2 days, of course, the Sheffield was sunk. And everybody in charge knew there was going to be a real war. Whatever talks might or might not happen, there was going to be a real war. And they realised there were still going to be problems, big problems.
Safeguarding the Royal Navy Task Force was at the heart of the decision to sink the Belgrano. Vice Admiral McClement says the actions of those on board HMS Conqueror were fully justified.
One regrets loss of life in war. Galtieri had invaded the islands. He needed to be evicted, and you use brutal force to try and shorten the war as quickly as possible so that you succeed. The Belgrano was a threat, needed to be taken out, and we did it.
There's no doubt this sinking of the Belgrano was a decisive moment in the Falklands conflict as the Argentinian Navy retreated to port and played no further part in the war. Mark White, GB News.
Coming up, we'll be discussing the Blair years as today marks 25 years since him becoming Prime Minister, and I have an exclusive interview with the Labour MP. Fabian Hamilton is a real name. That's after the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It is 3:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date. At least 300 people have been intercepted on up to 9 small boats in the English Channel so far today. Yesterday, the Ministry of Defence confirmed that 254 people arrived in 7 small boats. A survey of asylum seekers in northern France has found 3/4 of them would still try to reach the UK, despite the possibility they could be sent to Rwanda. The refugee charity Care for Calais says the government's plans have done little to stop people making the journey across the English Channel. In Ukraine, Mariupol officials say Russia resumed shelling the besieged steel plant in the city as soon as buses carrying fleeing civilians had left. Footage shows them emerging from the plant's rubble and being led to waiting coaches. One woman said she and her baby had been waiting for 2 months to be rescued. Ukraine's Navy has released footage of what it claims shows a drone strike hitting 2 Russian high-speed patrol boats. The Raptor-class boats are said to have been destroyed at dawn near Snake Island in the Black Sea. Russia has not yet responded to the claim, and GB News cannot independently verify the video. 2.7 million people have been referred for cancer checks over the last year. NHS data shows the number of patients receiving cancer treatment has risen by 2,000 since the start of the pandemic. Thousands of voters will have no choice of who to vote for in Thursday's local elections, as some council seats only have one candidate. In the 91 impacted council seats, the individual unopposed candidates will be elected automatically. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Gloria with this afternoon's briefing.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Tony Blair has praised Keir Starmer for setting Labour back on a winning path in a video marking 25 years since his landslide election victory. The former party boss, who's been left out in the cold by successive Labour leaders since leaving office in 2007, said the party now had a renewed sense of purpose and mission ahead of Thursday's local elections. This marks the first time that the former Prime Minister has been used in official Labour Party broadcasts since he left office. Joining me now is former Labour media advisor Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, good to talk to you, good to see you.
Good morning, good. Right.
So, Tony Blair being used in this party election broadcast, how wise was that? He was undoubtedly incredibly popular 25 years ago, but not so much now.
Yes, I mean, I think he's got a very strange legacy. As if you go back 25 years, it was a time when we were all incredibly optimistic. I mean, I remember that morning just thinking anything was possible, that, you know, we'd have fantastic education, we'd have fantastic health. And I mean, and actually he did put a lot of money into things. And every day there were announcements, there was, you know, Sure Start, there was the minimum wage. It was all fantastic. And then, you know, the problem is you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose, and the prose was tough, and the toughest bit was the Iraq War. Now, whether people have moved beyond that and think, well, actually, there was a lot of good that he did, let's remember it, I don't know. And I mean, I think putting him in a party political broadcast is a double-edged sword.
And of course, Labour haven't won a general election since 2005. It's been a pretty torrid time. I was elected in 2010, the first election that Labour lost, and they just kept getting further and further away from the voters. How's it doing now?
Well, I think undoubtedly that it's come back. I mean, I think that I think the Corbyn years were very, very tough for Labour. I think there was no question that that while the membership adored Jeremy Corbyn, actually the country didn't, and there were real problems. And I think that Keir Starmer has brought the country back. I think there's no question that on every single indicator that matters, that he is way, way ahead of Boris Johnson, that the polling, he's way ahead. So I certainly think that it has changed. And actually, what Tony Blair did was he went from losing to a landslide. What Keir has to do is he has to go from losing a landslide to winning. He can do it, but actually we've got to get that incredible sense of optimism that Blair did engender, and that's what Labour has to have if they're going to win. We can't win because Boris Johnson isn't any good, because he lies, because, you know, he doesn't do what he says, because he's a terrible Prime Minister. We actually have to win because people believe that Keir Starmer is the right man. I do believe it, but I don't think the whole country has yet to be persuaded.
And let's assume, we can't fully assume, but let's assume for the purposes of this interview that it is Keir Starmer versus Boris Johnson come the next election. Boris Johnson wins hands down on personality. Does it matter that Keir Starmer is a bit wooden?
I think the terrible shame is that anybody who knows him, and I'm sure the same goes for you, Gloria, they know he's not wooden. I mean, he's really interesting. He's really good company, and he just is hopeless at projecting that. But I think that what matters, I mean, certainly you must have talked to people like I have who've been out on the doorstep. I mean, people don't really mind that they'd rather go for a pint with Boris at the moment. At the moment, they are so angry. I mean, I hear this, I mean, not just from Labour activists, but from an awful lot of Conservatives who say that going out on the doorstep at the moment is really unpleasant because people are so cross about what happened, about Partygate. That and it's not just the funerals, it's not just the people die, it's all the people who got fined lots and lots of money, and then they see that it was just rampaging around in Downing Street. And I think that complete lack of trust is actually the most important. If you don't trust your Prime Minister, how can you elect him?
And just finally, while we've got you, if we can just use your very considerable expertise and duration in Westminster, it's not having a good time at the moment. I mean, we've had porn, we've had bullying, we've had sexual misconduct. In your view, is this a debate about the culture of Westminster, or are we just talking about a few bad apples in Parliament?
I think like you do, Gloria, I think it's about culture. I think there is a real problem across the piece about the entitlement of MPs, and that they've been beginning. I mean, since the expenses scandal, where MPs thought they could put in for anything, life has begun to change, but it certainly hasn't changed for a lot of the people who work for MPs. And that's what a lot of people are talking about is actually, it's tough if you're a woman MP. It's tough if you're a woman MP sitting next to a man who's watching porn. But actually, it's much, much more difficult for the aides, for the people who work for the MPs. And somehow that culture has got to change. And because, I mean, Gloria, you're treated like princes and princesses in there. You are so important when you're an MP. And as long as you feel you're that important, there is a sense of impunity.
Really good point. Really interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much, Scarlett Maguire. Thank you. Now it's time for the latest in my series of special interviews with MPs, where we go behind the politics and get to know the real person. I sat down with Labour MP Fabian Hamilton in a wide-ranging interview in which he described his love for politics and his election as an MP in that 1997 Blair landslide victory. Fabian Hamilton, did you grow up in a political household?
I certainly did, Gloria. Both my parents were Liberals, not Liberal Democrats, but the old-fashioned Liberals, the party of Joe Grimmond and Jeremy Thorpe. And they were quite close to both, actually. My dad was Thorpe's London solicitor.
Gosh, busy job.
Yeah, it certainly was. Well, he didn't do any of the crime stuff,
right,
of course.
Okay.
He just did the non-political administrative work. But Dad stood for Parliament 4 times for the Liberals. The first time when I was 11 in 1966, and I wandered the streets of Wandsworth with him and listened open-mouthed to what people were saying on the doorstep. Oh yes, we like the Liberals, but we're not going to vote for you. Why not? Well, because you're not going to win. This is a Labour area. But I found it fascinating, and that really gave me the taste.
When did you decide to join the Labour Party?
When I was at university, kind of like most students, I toyed with all sorts of lefty, crazy, radical organisations. But finally, in 1976, I would say, a few of us decided to join the Labour Party. And one of our friends who worked for one of the students' unions in York stood as a candidate for the council. Now, he didn't win the seat, but we worked with him, and we really enjoyed being part of the Labour Party. And of course, Alex Lyon, Claire Short's late husband, was then the MP for York, and he was Home Office Minister. And it was a joy to campaign with him. He was a great man.
You're Jewish. Tell me what being Jewish means to you.
Well, it didn't mean a lot when I was a child. It meant going round to Grandma's in Kilburn for some sort of weird meal where you couldn't eat bread. I only later found out it was called Seder night, and it was the night before Passover or Pesach, which Jews have just celebrated around the time of Easter. But nobody actually explained what this was all about. So I grew up knowing little bits about Judaism, knowing we were Jewish, of course, knowing that we'd had family who'd been killed in the Holocaust, but not understanding what it was all about, because we didn't go to synagogue. I didn't have a bar mitzvah. My father was from a Sephardic background. My mother was from an Ashkenazi background. So, Eastern Europe Riga, Latvia, Russia, and my dad sort of North Africa and ultimately the Ottoman Empire. So very, very mixed. But I think after the war, a lot of Jewish people either became more orthodox and observant, or they tried to assimilate completely. And my family decided to assimilate, even though my grandfather had been a rabbi.
You, actually, before we go on to that, how did the anti-Semitism, it obviously it affected everybody in the Labour Party. It was a great source of shame for many people in the Labour Party. Did it feel different to you as someone of Jewish?
Well, oddly not, because I only speak for myself, because I know a lot of my colleagues, especially my female colleagues, had a terrible time. But what I found was it was a bit like Iran, you couldn't talk about Israel. You could talk about Judaism. Now, of course, the two are completely intertwined. You go to a synagogue on a Sabbath, on the Shabbat service, and you have a prayer for the President of Israel and the State of Israel, and a prayer for the Queen and Her Majesty's government in the UK. So Israel and the Jewish faith are absolutely inextricably intertwined. But of course, in Iran, you're not allowed to talk about Israel, but you are very, very much allowed to worship, and synagogues are protected, and there's a place in the Majlis for a Jewish MP. But you dare talk about Israel and you're in trouble. And I felt it was a bit like that. You could never be sympathetic to Israel. But I never felt threatened as a Jewish man. I think a lot of my female colleagues did, though, and it was shocking.
So you were elected in 1997, that amazing Labour victory. You're now 67 years old.
Can't believe it.
I can't believe it, looking at you. Fit and healthy? You cycled here, which is why I'm asking you that question.
Yes, well, cycling saved my life in a way. Back in 1999, I started getting hypertension, high blood pressure. And given that my father had died of heart disease and my mother was not terribly well towards the end of her life, and she died aged 70, just 72 of heart disease, that my doctor said, if you don't want to go the same way as your parents, you need to start doing exercise. Now, I was totally anti-exercise. I hated sport. And my dad loved sport, by the way, but he didn't play much in his later years. I reluctantly decided to cycle. My doctor said, go cycling or go swimming. Well, I hate water and I can't stand swimming. Boys and machines, so I quite liked cycling, the idea of a mechanical thing. And I got into it in a big way. And the sort of short runs on the bike turned into commuting every single day from my mum's house in Willesden Green to Parliament, so it's 7.5 miles each way. So I did 15 miles a day on a metal bike. It wasn't a very fast bike, but it got me fit. And then gradually, I got onto better and better bikes, which I now build for myself. But that actually transformed my health. I lost weight, and I was just fit. I started getting muscle where I never thought there was muscle, like around your knees and things. And it really, really saved my life, I think.
Did you change your diet? Do you drink alcohol? Have you ever drunk alcohol?
I have. I used to run a wine company, actually, that did really well. So I used to do wine tastings. I was never a great drinker, a bit like my dad. My mum liked a glass of wine. My dad, a bit reluctant. I used to like sort of gin and tonic and obviously wine and beer, but I've just given it all up. If you're diabetic, which I was diagnosed with in, 2010, you've got to be very careful about alcohol because of the sugars. And I more or less gave up. I never enjoyed drink much. I enjoyed the wine tasting, but I spat it out. Most of my colleagues didn't. So I quite like the flavours, but I'm not a great drinker, and I hardly, Christmas maybe, birthdays, and that's about it.
Gosh, if only.
It helps
say lots of viewers.
But Gloria, it helps when you don't enjoy it particularly.
Yes.
And you don't find it satisfying.
Yeah. Yes. It's a curse, which I do enjoy it.
No,
but it's not just. So you arrived here on a bike, but you also ride a motorbike.
Yes. Well, it's an interesting one because a friend of mine who was a fire officer in Leeds actually, and you've got to be incredibly fit to be a fire officer. Can't say fireman anymore. And he is a keen cyclist. And he and I went to France, to Paris, 10 years ago, actually, 2012. We cycled to Paris. Of course, he's 15 years younger than me, so he was well ahead of me. But I managed to keep up just about. But one of the things he said to me was, I love cycling, but actually, when it's 2 o'clock in the morning or midnight and you've just finished voting in the House of Commons, do you really want to get on your bicycle or take a cab? No. Why don't you learn to ride a motorbike? Because he's also a keen motorcyclist. So he got me onto the track. And eventually I took the test in 2013. And I now have a couple of really lovely motorbikes, one of which is electric. But I switch between the motorbikes and the cycling. I love both. And the electric motorbike's fantastic, I have to say.
Do people joke with you about having a midlife crisis?
Oh, yeah, of course they do, absolutely. But I haven't got a Harley. Before anybody asks, I don't like Harley Davidsons. I had a Triumph, brilliant bikes, British bikes, of course. I've got a Honda at home in Leeds, and I've got this Zero Californian electric bike, which is just terrific. It's like a big 1 litre cafe racer type thing, to those of you who are interested in such things.
Right, just finally on politics.
Yeah.
You are opposed to nuclear weapons.
Always have been.
You're the Shadow Minister for Peace and Disarmament. You're a Shadow Foreign Office Minister. Labour Party policy is pro-nuclear deterrent. How do you reconcile those two positions?
Well, I'm a Democrat, and I believe in collective organisation. One day the Labour Party might revert to its previous policy under Neil Kinnock of unilateral nuclear disarmament. But whilever the majority of the Labour Party, including the trade union movement, say we believe in the deterrent, then my job is to make sure that the deterrent stays as a deterrent, that it's never used, that we use the Non-Proliferation Treaty to reduce the number of nuclear weapons, to stop proliferation, that we persuade countries like Iran, like North Korea, obviously not really possible, but India, Pakistan, Israel, countries that we know have got nuclear weapons. We persuade them that this is actually not the best way to defend your country, and that if you're like Iran and you've signed the NPT, then you're entitled to civil nuclear power and nuclear technology for medical use, but not to weaponize it through plutonium. So the NPT has been the most effective weapons treaty in the history of mankind. These weapons are horrific, and everybody, even if they believe in the deterrent, knows how bad they are and how shocking they are and the effect that they have. So I'm happy to go along with the majority because I believe in democracy, and I'm happy to stand by that. People know what my view is, and that means I'm more likely to want to persuade countries and the UK to reduce the number of warheads, to diminish the number we've got, so we've got the bare minimum necessary to be deterrent, if you like. I'm not sure it's the best way of stopping people invading our country, but it's there, and I abide by that.
So I said earlier that you were elected in 1997. It's a long time since the Labour Party had any sort of victory, never mind a victory like that. 2005, the last time the Labour Party won an election. How do you go from those dizzy heights to some of the darkest and deepest lows that you have been witness to during your time as a Labour MP?
I think you've always got to have faith in human beings. Now, what we're seeing in Ukraine obviously leads you to think that all of humanity is doomed, but that's not the case. Every single day, as a constituency MP, I see the best of humanity, as well as sometimes the worst. I see people who will do something for their neighbours, their friends, their family, their community, without knowing those individuals personally. Last night I was at an iftar dinner, for example, which is the breaking of the fast during Ramadan. Now, I'm not a Muslim, but I was there with loads of Jewish people, loads of Christian people, loads of Sikh people, and we were celebrating a Muslim festival that didn't mean much to us, but meant a lot to them. Many of them obviously old friends of mine, but to many people there, complete strangers. And it seemed to me that this is the best of humanity, celebrating somebody else's faith and religion and ceremony without knowing what it's about, but learning what it's, and learning and understanding it, and being empathetic with those people. And so that's the best of humanity, the caring, the loving, the understanding, the interest in others. And that's what keeps the hope going. Now, it is deeply depressing when you lose elections over and over again. But I have to say in North East Leeds, I've been very fortunate. My majority's gone up. Now, I don't take the credit for that. I play my part in it. I do the job as best I can. But we started off winning by just under 7,000 majority. And in 2019, the worst year for Labour since most people can remember, my majority went up to 17,000 plus. Now, as I say, I don't take the credit, it's a collective effort. But the fact is that we've got to be doing something right. And the people I represent are the best. You know, they're fantastic. And they're very diverse. And I absolutely love that constituency. And that's what keeps me going.
Final question. Who is your favourite ever Labour leader?
Ooh, that's a very difficult one, actually. Do you know, I'm going to be controversial here. Are we talking about Labour leaders that I've known or Labour leaders per se?
Labour leaders per se.
Right, OK. Well, I think Clem Attlee was very clever. I won't say he's my favourite. I never met him. I have read a biography of him, and he sounds like an extraordinary and interesting man. Harold Wilson seemed to be Labour leader forever when I was growing up, from the age of 9 in '64 to the age of 21 when he finally retired. And I had enormous admiration for Harold Wilson. And Gordon Brown, you might be surprised at that, but I really love Gordon Brown. I think he's underrated. I think history will treat him more kindly than we did at the time and that the current media did. So I'm sorry I can't really answer that, but I'd say between the two, difficult one, possibly Harold Wilson, because I looked up to him, whereas Gordon was a colleague.
Yeah.
But both have their place. Obviously, Wilson much more successful because he won elections and Gordon didn't, tragically.
Fabian Hamilton, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Time for your views on the politics of the day. Bob says 1997, Labour won a massive majority under Blair. 13 years later, the same result. The UK is skint again. Every Labour government has left the country skint. That's a fact you won't read out. But Labour go skint. I read it out. Mike says Sir Keir Starmer says number 10 most fined workplace. Yes, that's because people were walking, unlike the union-dominated civil service who chose to work from home. Mark says choosing between Conservative and Labour is like choosing between an incompetent, unclear but possible future and no future under Labour. Robert says Lib Dem lies as normal. We need people who can run an organisation. The politicians treat the voters as they are stupid. You have been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria DiPiero. I will be back tomorrow at noon. Up next, it's Drive Time with Colin Brazier. The UK is looking showery for many this afternoon. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off in the southwest, after a slow start, things should brighten up here through the afternoon, making it feel warmer than yesterday. Watch out for a few showers though. Over in the southeast and around London, it's likely to remain largely cloudy with just a few showers in the north. There will be further scattered showers across much of Wales this afternoon. Many places will avoid them though, with some warm, sunny spells instead. A similar picture as we look toward northwest England, where there will also be quite a few showers but also some sunny spells. Temperatures will reach highs of around 16 or 17 Celsius. Coastal parts of northeast England may have some lingering fog. Further inland it should be somewhat brighter, but there will be a few showers around, a little cooler here, with highs around 13 Celsius. Northern parts of Scotland will have a mostly fine afternoon with some lengthy, bright or sunny periods. Central and southern parts are going to be cloudier with some scattered showers. We can also expect a few showers to develop across Northern Ireland. These shouldn't be particularly heavy though, and there will be a few bright or sunny spells in between. Some showers easing as we go towards this evening, but continuing for Northern England and Southern Scotland.
I'm Darren McCaffrey and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Monday to Thursday, 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier.